Hello, my name is Graham Whitaker, 38 years old. I live in Colorado Springs in a small house nestled at the foot of the Rocky Mountains where the cold wind blows through the pine forests as if trying to recount the story of my life. I was once a fighter pilot soaring through the skies in an F-15E Strike Eagle, once the pride of an entire nation. I was once the cherished son of a powerful family, but now I sit here in a dimly lit room illuminated only by the faint glow of an old desk lamp, staring at the fragments of my life and wondering, when did everything start to fall apart? This house isn't large, just enough for me and Isla, my daughter, to get by. 4 wooden walls, a worn-out sofa, and a fireplace I rarely light because every time I look into the flames I see burning memories. I'm not the kind of person who dwells on the past. Pilots like me were trained to always look forward, to anticipate the flight path, calculate angles, and keep our minds sharp even when the G-forces threaten to make us black out. But tonight, with Isla sound asleep in her room with the world outside plunged into silence, I can't stop myself from looking back. Back to where it all began and where it all ended. I'm not sure I want to tell this story. Some things are so painful that you just want to bury them, like how they bury a wrecked plane deep in the ground so no one can see its blemish. But there's something inside me, a small remnant of the man who once believed in honor and truth, urging me to speak. Perhaps it's for Isla, so that one day she'll understand why her father chose silence, chose to walk away from it all, chose a simple life over continuing to soar to the heights others dream of. Or perhaps I just want to understand why myself. I was born in Washington, D.C., in a mansion so vast that every step I took as a child echoed as if I were walking through a museum. My father, Senator Raymond Whitaker, was a man the world knew through his televised speeches, handshakes with heads of state, and perfectly rehearsed smiles practiced in front of a mirror. He was a conservative, tough, and always put the family image above everything else. To him, the Whitaker family wasn't just a name. It was a brand, a symbol of power and honor. And I, the eldest son, was expected to keep that brand polished. My childhood wasn't filled with running through fields or climbing trees with friends. Instead, I grew up amidst lavish dinner parties where I had to wear a suit from the age of 6. Learn how to shake hands properly and smile even when I didn't understand what the adults were talking about. My mother, a gentle woman who always lived in my father's shadow, tried to make up for it with hugs and bedtime stories. But even she couldn't protect me from my father's harsh rules. "Graham," he would say, his voice low and sharp as a blade, "you're a Whitaker. You're not allowed to fail. You're not allowed to be weak." I had a younger brother, Colin, 3 years my junior. Colin was the sun in our parents' eyes, especially our father's. While I was pressured to excel in academics, sports, and maintain a perfect image, Colin was allowed to be free. He studied art, painted, played the piano, and lived a life I could only dream of. I didn't resent Colin. He was a good kid, always smiling, always trying to cheer me up with his scribbled drawings or innocent stories. But deep down, I was jealous. Jealous because he didn't have to carry the weight of the Whitaker name on his shoulders. The only person who truly understood me back then was my grandfather, a retired World War II pilot. He wasn't like my father. He didn't care about power or fame. He told me stories about flying his P-51 Mustang, about the feeling of freedom as he glided through the clouds, about how the sky taught him humility. "Grandson," he used to say, his eyes lighting up like a child's, "up there, no one cares whose son you are. It's just you, the plane, and your decisions." Those words carved themselves into my mind like a small flame burning steadily in my chest. I knew I wanted to be a pilot, not to make my father proud, but to be free, to be myself. I never told anyone about the nights I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and imagining myself flying. In those dreams, I wasn't Graham Whitaker, son of Senator Whitaker. I was just Graham, a boy with wings of steel soaring through the clouds, untouchable. But that dream, like everything good in my life, was never easy. When I was 17, I applied to the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. My father didn't approve. "A pilot?" he scoffed as if the idea were a joke. "You could be a lawyer, a politician, even a governor. Why choose a dangerous job with no future?" I didn't answer. I quietly gathered my application, sent it off myself, and prayed. I didn't want to rely on my father's name, didn't want anyone to think I got into USAFA because of family influence. And when the acceptance letter arrived, I cried. Not out of joy, but because for the first time I felt I had accomplished something on my own. But that joy didn't last. My father looked at the letter, nodded, and said, "Good. But don't embarrass me." That was all he said. No hug, no congratulations, just another order to follow. I stood there in the vast living room of our family home, clutching the acceptance letter from the Air Force Academy, feeling as though I had touched the sky only to be yanked back to the ground. I wanted to scream, to tell him this wasn't his victory but mine. But I didn't. I just nodded like an obedient soldier and turned away. Inside me, the flame of my dream still burned, and I knew that no matter what my father said, I would fly. Not for him, but for myself. The United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs was where I stepped into a new world, one that was harsh and unforgiving. From the very first day as I set foot on the campus with its cold gray stone buildings and the Rocky Mountains as a backdrop, I felt the weight of pressure on my shoulders. This wasn't an ordinary school. It was a crucible where young men like me were thrown into the fire to see if they could withstand it or melt away. Every day began at 5 in the morning, when the shrill sound of the wake-up call rang out like a warning that there was no room for weakness. We ran 10 miles in the thin air of the high plains, our breath steaming in the freezing dawn. Then came classes, aerodynamics, mathematics, air combat tactics, and lectures on military history that I memorized word for word. But the hardest part wasn't the exams or the physical training. It was the looks from those around me. "The senator's son," they called me behind my back, their voices tinged with mockery. They thought I got in because of the Whitaker name, because of my father and his connections. They didn't know about the sleepless nights I spent studying, the sweat and blood I poured into training to prove I belonged. I didn't blame them. In a place like USAFA, where everyone was vying to be the best, suspicion was inevitable. But every time I heard that nickname, I clenched my fists and told myself, "You'll show them." I studied as if every test was a battle, trained as if every run was my last chance to prove myself. There were days when I was so exhausted I wanted to collapse on my dorm bed, but the image of my grandfather, his wrinkled smile and stories of the sky, pulled me back up. I wanted to fly, not just to escape my father's shadow, but to find myself. Life at the academy was a relentless series of challenges. There were mornings when we stood in the rain, soaked in our uniforms, while instructors yelled at us for minor infractions like shoes not polished brightly enough. There were nights when I sat at my desk, eyes burning from lack of sleep, struggling to solve a dynamics problem just to avoid a low grade. But there were also moments that made it all worthwhile. Like the first time I sat in a flight simulator, gripping the control stick as the screen before me displayed a vast blue sky. Even though it was just a simulation, the feeling made my heart race, as if I were truly flying. Among my classmates, I grew closest to Jake, a tall guy from Texas with an easy smile and a distinctive drawl. Jake didn't care whose son I was. To him, I was just Graham, the roommate who made him laugh with stories about my grandfather. "You know, Whitaker," Jake said one night as we ate late in the mess hall, "I bet your grandpa would be proud if he could see you now." Those words, simple as they were like a shot of strength. Jake didn't know that on the days I felt like giving up, he was one of the reasons I kept going. Then I met Rachel. She came into my life like a gentle breeze amidst the storm of pressure and discipline. Rachel was a psychology instructor teaching a course on stress management for cadets. The first time I saw her, she stood at the front of the classroom wearing a light blue blouse, her wavy brown hair neatly tied back, her voice, warm yet vibrant, commanding the room's silence. She didn't just teach us how to cope with stress. She shared stories of pilots who had overcome intense psychological challenges. "In the sky, you can control the plane," she said, her green eyes gleaming with intelligence. "But if you can't control yourself, you'll never take off." I don't know when I started falling for her. Maybe it was the time she asked me to stay after class to talk about an essay I wrote, in which I described my grandfather and my dream of flying. "Your story is moving, Graham," she said, and I felt my face flush, not from embarrassment, but because she looked at me like she genuinely wanted to understand. We started talking more, first about coursework, then about life, about dreams. Rachel was 2 years older than me, but she never made me feel small. On the contrary, she made me feel like I could conquer the world. Our first dates took place in the academy's mess hall or on the trails around campus. She loved walking, and I loved walking with her, listening to her stories about her family in Ohio, about her dream of becoming a psychologist to help soldiers. "You know," she said once as we sat on a rock overlooking a valley, "I think you pilots are stronger than people realize. But sometimes I worry that you forget how to talk about what you feel." I laughed, telling her pilots didn't have time for emotions, but deep down I knew she was right, and I started opening up to her little by little. After 4 years, I graduated from USAFA at the top of my class, an achievement I hoped would change how my father saw me. But when I called home to share the news, he only said, "Good. What's next?" I didn't respond. I was used to him never being satisfied. Instead, I focused on the next step, fighter pilot training. This was my real dream, and I knew I'd have to bleed for it. The pilot training program took place at an airbase in Texas, and it was more grueling than anything I'd ever experienced. We started with T-38 Talon trainers, small but lightning-fast machines. The first time I actually took off, the feeling was indescribable. The sky opened up before me, vast and endless, and in that moment I felt like myself, not anyone's son, not the bearer of the Whitaker name. But that joy came at a steep price. Every flight was a test, controlling speed, altitude, angle, and yourself. A single mistake could cost you your life. The survival training was the toughest part. We were dropped into the wilderness with no food, no water, just a knife and a compass. I learned to build a fire, hunt, and endure bone-chilling cold. There were nights when I lay curled up under a tree, starving and exhausted, wondering if I had the strength to go on. But then I thought of my grandfather, of his stories about surviving being shot down. "Grandson," he'd said, "the sky is never easy to conquer, but it will teach you to be stronger." And I became stronger. Rachel was my light in those days. She moved to Texas to work at a psychological research center near the base, and we started living together in a small apartment. After training, I'd come home to her, and she always had a way of making me forget the stress. We'd lie on the couch, eat pizza, watch old movies, and talk about the future. "You'll fly an F-15 someday, I'm sure of it," she said, and I'd laugh, pulling her close. "As long as you're here, I can fly anywhere." She got pregnant with Isla in the final year of training. When she told me, I sank into a chair, unable to believe my ears. "A baby?" I mumbled, and she laughed, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Our baby, Graham." I hugged her tightly, feeling like the whole world was in my arms. But alongside the joy came fear. A father? Me, who grew up under the shadow of a cold father, could I do better? Rachel took my hand and whispered, "You'll be an amazing father. I know it." After training, I was selected to fly the F-15E Strike Eagle, one of the world's most powerful fighter jets. The day I received my first assignment at a base in Arizona, I felt like I'd touched my dream. But looking at Rachel, her belly now visibly growing, I knew that dream was no longer just mine. I had to fly, not just for myself, but for her, for the child about to be born, and for the promises I'd made to myself. My father didn't attend the assignment ceremony. He sent a brief, cold, congratulatory telegram. My mother called, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm proud of you, Graham." But I knew she couldn't come because my father wouldn't allow it. Colin was the only one who showed up with a bouquet of flowers and an awkward hug. "You did it, Graham," he said, and I smiled, patting his shoulder. But in Colin's eyes, I caught a fleeting glimpse of envy, a small crack I didn't want to believe was there. Becoming a fighter pilot wasn't just about the flights. It was a battle with myself, with expectations and with fears I didn't dare admit. Every takeoff carried the risk that I might not return. But I flew anyway because that was how I proved I was more than just Senator Whitaker's son. I was Graham Whitaker, a pilot, a man, and soon a father. But deep down, I could feel the cracks growing. In my family, in myself. And I didn't know that in the years to come, everything I'd built would come crashing down, like a plane shot out of the sky. Rachel gave birth to Isla on a spring afternoon in Arizona, when golden sunlight streamed through the hospital window, illuminating the room as if the entire world were welcoming our daughter. I stood by Rachel's side, gripping her hand through every contraction, and when Isla's first cry echoed through the room, my heart felt like it stopped. She was tiny, with her mother's green eyes and a tuft of soft black hair nestled perfectly in my arms. "Isla," Rachel whispered, exhausted but radiant with joy. "We'll call her Isla." I nodded, speechless, gazing at her and thinking this was the most miraculous thing I'd ever witnessed. For the first time in my life, I felt like I truly had a family. Not the cold, rule-bound Whitaker family, but my own small, warm, love-filled family. We got married shortly after in a simple ceremony in the backyard of our rented Arizona home. Rachel wore a plain white dress, her hair loose, her smile brighter than the sun. I stood before her in my Air Force uniform, feeling like the luckiest man alive. My mother came, hugging me tightly and crying when she saw Isla in Rachel's arms. My father didn't show. He was busy with a meeting in DC, but sent a card with a curt note. "Congratulations. Uphold the honor." I tossed the card in the trash. Colin came, bringing a painting of Rachel and me under a starry sky. "Graham, I hope you're happy," he said, and I hugged him, trying not to dwell on the flicker of envy I'd seen in his eyes the year before. The early years of our marriage were the best of my life. Rachel and I lived in a small house on the outskirts of the airbase, waking up to mornings filled with each other's presence. Isla's laughter echoing through the rooms, and evenings on the porch watching the sunset over the mountains. I continued to fly, piloting the F-15E Strike Eagle on bombing missions, escorts, or international exercises. Each flight was a challenge, with G-forces crushing my body, the roar of engines, and the pressure to be flawless in every maneuver. But coming home to Rachel and Isla made it all worthwhile. Rachel still worked at the Psychological Research Center, and despite her busy schedule, she always made time for me and Isla. "You're the pilot, but I'm the one keeping this family airborne," I'd tease, and she'd laugh, pulling me into a hug. But a pilot's life was never easy. Long deployments, sometimes lasting months or even quarters, became a regular part of my life. I was sent to bases overseas, Japan, Germany, the Middle East, for exercises or to support operations. Each time I left, I held Isla tightly, promising to bring her a gift from wherever I was going. "I'll be back soon, okay?" I'd say, stroking her soft hair. Isla would nod, but her big round eyes always left me aching. Rachel would smile, kiss me, and say, "Fly safe, Graham. We'll be waiting." But I knew, behind that smile, she was grappling with loneliness. During those months away, I lived in sparse dorm rooms with gray walls and the ticking of a clock that reminded me time was slipping by without my family. I called Rachel whenever I could, but the signal at remote bases was often unreliable, and her voice over the phone always felt slightly distant. "Isla just took her first steps, you know," she told me during one call, and I laughed, but my heart ached because I wasn't there to see it. I sent gifts home, a Japanese doll, a bracelet from Germany, but those gifts couldn't make up for the moments I missed. When Isla was 3, my mother started visiting Arizona regularly to help Rachel with her. She'd stay for weeks, cooking, playing with Isla, and keeping Rachel company while I was gone. "She's just like you when you were little, Graham," my mother said over the phone, her voice full of love. She's strong, but she needs her father. Those words cut like a knife. I wanted to be there, to be the father Isla needed, but my job wouldn't allow it. Every takeoff, I told myself I was doing this for my family, but every landing left me feeling like I was leaving them behind. By the time Isla was 5, I started noticing small changes in Rachel. She still loved me. I was certain of that. But some days she grew quieter, her eyes distant when I talked about my flights. She began wearing more makeup, red lipstick, and expensive perfume she rarely used before. "I just want to feel like myself," she said when I asked, and I nodded, reassuring myself it was just her way of coping with loneliness. I also noticed she no longer complained about my long deployments like she used to. Instead, she'd smile and say, "Do your job, I'm fine." I wanted to believe her, to believe everything was okay, but something in her voice unsettled me. Isla, meanwhile, became the light of my life. She was smart, curious, and always asking about the sky. "How high do you fly, Daddy? Do you see angels?" she'd ask, and I'd laugh, scoop her up and tell her stories about clouds and stars. I taught her to fold paper airplanes, and we'd sit on the grass in the backyard watching them soar in the breeze. Those moments were my medicine, helping me through the stress of my job, the weight of takeoffs with the silent acknowledgement that I might not return. The Whitaker family in DC remained part of my life, though I tried to keep my distance. My father began acknowledging my achievements, especially when I was promoted and received a medal for a mission in the Middle East. "Well done, Graham," he said in a rare phone call, his voice still cold but tinged with approval. "You're bringing honor to the Whitaker name." I didn't respond. I didn't fly for the Whitaker name, but for myself, for Rachel and Isla. But I knew he'd never understand that. Colin, my brother, had changed too. He still kept in touch, but his calls became less frequent. When I visited DC, I noticed he was more distant, less open about himself. He'd become a somewhat successful artist with exhibitions in New York and Chicago. But whenever I talked about my work, my flights, I saw his eyes darken as if he envied what I'd achieved. "You're always the hero, huh?" he joked once, but his smile wasn't genuine. I tried not to dwell on it, but the rift between us grew more apparent. When Isla was 8, I started to sense the fragility of my little family. Rachel still loved me, I was sure of it. But she was less open about her feelings, and her hugs weren't as tight as before. She started going out more, joining book clubs or meeting friends I didn't know. "I need a life of my own, Graham," she said, and I nodded, though my heart felt heavy. I told myself she needed space, that she'd sacrificed so much to be with me. But every time I saw her putting on makeup in front of the mirror with red lipstick and that rich perfume, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. That I was losing her without knowing why. Isla remained the bond that held us together. She was growing up fast with her bright questions and a smile that melted my heart. I made time for her whenever I was home, taking her to the park, teaching her to ride a bike, and telling her stories about my grandfather. But every time I left for a mission, I saw sadness in her eyes, as if she feared I wouldn't come back. "I promise, sweetheart," I'd say, kissing her forehead. But deep down, I knew my promises were never enough. One evening before I left for a 4-month mission in Guam, Rachel and I sat on the couch, Isla asleep in her room. I held her hand, trying to recapture the closeness that had slowly faded. "Are you okay, Rachel?" I asked softly. She looked at me, smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Graham, just tired. Don't worry." I wanted to press further, to dig into what she wasn't saying, but my phone rang. A call from the base about the mission. I kissed her, hugged her tightly, and walked out the door, unaware that it was the last time I'd leave with the belief that my family was still whole. The months in Guam passed in a blur of stress and loneliness. The mission was particularly grueling, with long night flights and endless tactical briefings. I called home when I could, but Rachel was increasingly hard to reach. "She's busy with Isla," I told myself, but the unease in my heart grew. During one video call, Isla mentioned that Uncle Colin had come to visit, and she loved painting with him. "Does Uncle Colin come often?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Isla nodded, smiling brightly. "Yeah, he comes a lot when you're not home." I smiled back, but my heart tightened. Colin. Why was he visiting so often? I tried to push the thought away, telling myself I was imagining things. Colin was my brother. Rachel was my wife. They were just helping each other while I was gone. But when my plane landed in Arizona a week early after 4 months, I couldn't have imagined I was about to face the cruelest truth of my life. The truck carrying me from the base rattled along the familiar road leading into the quiet Arizona suburb. The fiery red sunset stretched across the mountains, and I sat in the back, clutching my bag filled with anticipation. I hadn't told Rachel I was coming home. I wanted to surprise her and Isla. 4 months in Guam with grueling night flights and fitful sleep had left me yearning to return. I pictured Isla running into my arms, Rachel smiling and pulling me into an embrace. I'd bought a small wooden doll from a Guam market for Isla and an intricate silver necklace for Rachel. I wanted to tell her I was sorry, that I'd try to be home more, that I wouldn't let her feel alone anymore. But when the truck stopped in front of our small house, something made me pause. The house was eerily quiet, lacking the warm glow from the living room window that usually greeted me. I stepped out, stood at the door, my bag heavy on my shoulder. The unease from my calls with Isla about Colin's frequent visits resurfaced, but I pushed it down. "I'm overthinking," I told myself, sliding the key into the lock. The door creaked open softly, and I stepped inside. "Isla? Rachel?" I called, my voice echoing in the still air. No response. I set my bag down, looking around. The living room was unchanged. The worn sofa, Colin's painting on the wall, Isla's toys scattered on the floor. But something felt off. A strange perfume, not Rachel's, lingered in the air. My heart beat faster, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe Rachel had taken Isla somewhere. Maybe they'd be back soon. Then I heard soft footsteps from the hallway. Isla appeared wearing the airplane-patterned pajamas I'd bought her last year. Her green eyes lit up when she saw me. "Daddy!" she cried, running to me, her small arms wrapping tightly around my legs. I knelt down, hugging her, warmth flooding my chest. "I missed you, Daddy," she said, her voice chirping, but then she looked up, her eyes suddenly anxious. "Daddy, hide under the bed, Mommy's coming back soon." I frowned, confused. "What, sweetheart? Why would I hide from Mommy?" I chuckled, ruffling her hair, thinking it was a child's game. But Isla gripped my hand, her voice trembling. "Please, Daddy, Mommy. She doesn't want you here right now." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I looked into her eyes, saw the panic in them, and for the first time I felt an unnamed fear. Okay, I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. I'll do it." I didn't know why I agreed. Maybe it was Isla's eyes, the way she clutched my hand as if pleading. I crawled onto the floor, squeezing into the cramped space under the master bedroom bed, feeling both ridiculous and uneasy. The smell of old wood and dust filled my nose, and I lay there in the dark, wondering what I was doing. Minutes later, I heard the front door open. Rachel's high heels clicked on the wooden floor, accompanied by another voice, a man's, low and familiar. My heart stopped. I didn't want to believe it, but that voice, with its distinctive cadence, was unmistakable. It was Colin, my brother. They entered the bedroom, Rachel's soft laughter cutting through me like a knife. "You sure Isla's asleep?" Colin asked, his voice tinged with worry. "Yeah, she's out," Rachel replied, her tone gentler than usual. The door closed with a sharp click, and my blood turned to ice. I lay there under the bed, my breathing heavy, my body trembling with anger and shame. I heard them talking, whispered words I didn't want to comprehend, but each one carved itself into my mind. "I missed you, Rachel," Colin said, and I heard the rustle of fabric as if they were embracing. Rachel laughed, a sound I once loved, now sharp as a blade. "You always know how to make me laugh, Colin," she replied, and my heart shattered. I wanted to crawl out, pound on the door, scream for an explanation. I thought of the axe in the backyard. I could grab it, smash the door, confront them. Rage burned through me like wildfire, but then I glanced at Isla, standing in the doorway, her wide eyes filled with fear. She said nothing, just looked at me, and I knew I couldn't do it. Not in front of Isla. Not when she was this scared. I crawled out from under the bed, my body heavy as lead. I stood, took Isla's hand, and whispered, "Come on, sweetheart, let's go outside." She nodded, gripping my hand tightly, and we slipped out of the room, out of the house. As we stepped into the front yard, I saw Colin's car parked out front, the green Mustang he was so proud of. I stared at it, and everything became clear. This wasn't the first time. This wasn't a mistake. This was betrayal, from the wife I loved and the brother I trusted. I hailed a taxi, determined to take Isla to my parents' house in Georgetown. I didn't want her in that house for another second. "Is Mommy mad at me, Daddy?" Isla asked, her voice tiny as we sat in the cab. I turned to her, pain ripping through my chest. "No, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Mommy's not mad at you, she's confused. We'll figure it out, okay?" Isla nodded, but I could tell she didn't believe me. Neither did I. On the way, I asked her as gently as I could, "Isla, does Uncle Colin come to our house a lot?" She nodded, staring out the window. "Yeah, for a long time, like 2 years. Mommy told me to stay in my room and close the door when he came. She said if I told you, she'd kick me out." Her voice trembled and my blood boiled. 2 years. 2 years they hid this from me, betrayed me in my own home. Worse, they made Isla, my 8-year-old daughter, live in fear. I gripped the steering wheel, fighting to control my anger. "You did nothing wrong, Isla," I said, my voice choking. "I'm proud of you for being brave and telling me. I'll protect you, okay?" Isla nodded, a tear rolling down her cheek. I wanted to hug her, to tell her everything would be okay, but I knew it was a lie. Nothing was okay. When we reached the family mansion in Georgetown, my mother opened the door, her eyes full of worry. "Graham, what's going on? Why did you bring Isla here in the middle of the night?" I told her everything, each word cutting into me. She hugged Isla, took her to my old bedroom, then turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Graham," she whispered. "I didn't know it had gone this far." My father entered the living room, still in a crisp suit despite the late hour. I told him everything, unfiltered, my voice shaking with rage. "Colin and Rachel," I said. "They've been doing this behind my back in my own house for 2 years. I expected him to be furious, to take my side, but he just looked at me, his eyes cold as stone. "Are you sure, Graham?" he asked, his voice flat. "Do you have proof?" "Proof?" I shouted, unable to hold back. "I heard them, Dad. Isla told me everything. She's terrified because Rachel threatened to kick her out." But my father didn't flinch. He sat down, tapping his fingers on the armrest, then said, "You're an Air Force officer, Graham. You know what order and honor mean. If you make this public, you don't just drag Colin down, you drag me down. The entire Whitaker name." I stared at him, stunned. "What are you saying? Your son's been betrayed, your granddaughter's been threatened, and all you care about is your reputation?" He didn't answer immediately. He stood, walked to the window, and stared into the darkness. "Handle it quietly," he said, his voice sharp and cold. "Divorce discreetly. No press, no investigation. Don't let the military know. Understand?" I laughed, a bitter sound. "I understand, Dad. I understand you never cared about me, only the Whitaker name." I turned and walked out, leaving him standing in the cold mansion I once called home. I returned to Arizona that night, leaving Isla with my mother. I needed to face Rachel and Colin, but I knew I had to stay calm. I didn't want to hurt Isla more. When I walked into the house, Rachel was on the sofa, her eyes red. She stood when she saw me, her voice trembling. "Graham, when did you get back? Why didn't you call?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her, the woman I'd loved more than anything, now a stranger. "Colin, I said, my voice eerily calm. How long has he been here, Rachel? She opened her mouth, started to speak, then fell silent, looking down. Graham, I'm sorry, she whispered. It's not what you think. I was lonely. You were always gone, and Colin, he was here. He listened to me. Each word was a knife, but I didn't let her see my pain. And Isla? I asked. You threatened her, Rachel. You threatened to kick her out. You think that's okay? Rachel sobbed, collapsing to her knees before me. I didn't mean to, Graham. I was scared she'd tell you, scared you'd find out. I love you, I swear. But I shook my head, stepping back. You don't love me, I said. You love the man who's here when I'm gone. But that's not me. I turned away, unwilling to hear more. I'd seen enough, heard enough, and I knew I couldn't stay in this house any longer. I found Colin the next day at a small downtown cafe. He sat there in a rumpled shirt, avoiding my eyes. Graham, he said weakly, what do you want? I sat across from him, placing my wedding ring on the table. If you want her, Colin, I said coldly, take responsibility. But don't ever come near Isla again. I pushed the ring toward him along with the note I'd written the night before. If you want to keep her, do it with your own hands and your own means. Colin looked at the ring, then at me, tears in his eyes. I'm sorry, Graham, he said, but I stood and left without looking back. I didn't need apologies. I needed Isla, a new life, and to forget everything that had happened. I returned to the base, reported my mental state internally, and requested a transfer from flight duties to a simulator instructor role. I couldn't fly anymore, not out of fear, but because I refused to leave Isla again. I began divorce proceedings, giving Rachel the house but securing custody of Isla. I didn't want arguments, press, or anyone to know. My father was right about one thing. I needed to handle it quietly. But not for his reputation, for Isla. Isla and I moved to Colorado Springs on a crisp autumn day, when golden leaves fell gently along the road, as if paving the way for a new beginning. I chose a small house on the outskirts, nestled at the foot of the Rocky Mountains with rustic wooden walls, an old fireplace, and a large window overlooking the distant peaks. The house wasn't luxurious. No expensive paintings or lavish furniture like my parents' mansion in Georgetown. But to me, it was a place to heal, a place for Isla to grow up free from the shadows of painful memories. Those early days weren't easy. Each morning I woke with an emptiness in my chest, as if a part of me had been torn away when I left Arizona, left Rachel and Colin, left the sky I once loved. I was no longer a fighter pilot, no longer guiding an F-15E Strike Eagle through the clouds. Instead, I requested a transfer to become a simulator instructor at the United States Air Force Academy, USAFA, where my dream had first taken root. Giving up the sky was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but every time I looked at Isla with her bright green eyes and innocent smile, I knew it was the right one. She needed me, and I wouldn't let her endure any more pain. Isla, though only 8, was more perceptive than I realized. She didn't talk much about Rachel, but I knew she carried scars no child should bear. "Daddy, will Mommy come visit me?" she asked one evening as we sat down to a dinner of pasta I'd clumsily cooked. I paused, setting my fork down, searching for words that wouldn't hurt her. "Mommy, she's somewhere else right now, sweetheart," I said softly. "But I'm here. And I'll always be here for you." Isla nodded, her eyes fixed on her plate, and I knew she was hiding her sadness. I stood, pulled her into my arms, and held her tightly, whispering, "I love you, Isla, more than the sky." She gave a small smile, hugging me back, and in that moment I felt I could face anything. I began building a new life for the two of us. I taught Isla small but meaningful things. How to fold paper airplanes, tie her shoes properly, identify stars in the night sky. We gardened together, planting daisies she loved, though I often spilled soil or overwatered them. "Daddy, you're a pilot but can't grow plants," she giggled, and I pretended to be annoyed, scooping her up and spinning her around. Her laughter echoed through the yard, mingling with the mountain breeze, and I felt my heart lighten, as if the broken pieces of me were slowly coming together. In the evenings, we sat on the porch eating cookies and watching the sunset over the mountains. Isla loved hearing stories about my grandfather, about his World War II flights, how he survived being shot down. "Daddy, were you ever scared when you flew?" she asked, her eyes gleaming under the moonlight. I smiled, brushing her hair. "Yes, sweetheart, but I learned fear isn't a bad thing. What matters is overcoming it, and you do it for the people you love." Isla nodded as if she understood. And I hoped one day she'd grow up with the strength I lacked as a child. My work at USAFA was a new challenge, but also a way to rediscover meaning. Instead of sitting in a cockpit, I stood before young cadets, each carrying the same dream of flight I once had. I taught them how to control a plane in simulators, how to handle G-forces, how to stay calm when everything went chaotic. I didn't talk about the medals I'd earned or the dangerous missions I'd flown. Instead, I spoke of patience, believing in oneself and finding one's own path even when life knocks you down. The cadets looked at me with curiosity. Some whispered behind my back, wondering why a fighter pilot like me gave up the sky. "Major Whitaker flew F-15s. Why is he teaching simulators now?" I overheard one cadet say to another. I didn't explain. I didn't need them to understand. But one day, a cadet named Ryan, a blond young man with an enthusiastic voice, handed me a handwritten letter after class. "Sir," he said, hesitating, "I just wanted to say I admire you. Not because you flew, but because you chose to stay for your family. That's the strongest thing." I took the letter, unsure what to say, nodding and thanking him. That night, I opened the letter. The messy but heartfelt words spoke of how Ryan had heard rumors about me, about the divorce, my silence in the face of gossip, and respected my composure. "You teach us not just how to fly, but how to live," he wrote. The letter choked me up. I hadn't realized my silence, which I'd thought was weakness, could inspire others. After that, more letters came from other cadets calling me the quiet teacher. They didn't know the full story, but they sensed something in how I carried myself, and that was enough to keep me going. Isla loved joining me at USAFA on weekends. She'd run around the campus, eyeing the training planes parked on the tarmac with curiosity. Once I took her into the simulator room, letting her sit in the pilot's seat and grip the control stick. "Daddy, is this like the real thing?" she asked, her eyes sparkling as the screen showed a vast blue sky. I laughed, adjusting the tiny flight helmet on her head. "Close, sweetheart, but the real thing's up in the sky, and I'm not ready for you to fly yet." Isla giggled, pretending to push the stick, and I stood there watching her, my heart warmer than ever. In that moment, I wasn't a pilot, wasn't Senator Whitaker's son. I was Isla's dad, and that was what mattered most. I began teaching Isla independence, not to make her grow up too fast, but to make her strong, reliant on no one. I showed her how to cook simple meals, though we often laughed when we burned the eggs, and how to fix small things around the house like changing a light bulb or tightening a loose screw. "Daddy, will I be a pilot like you?" she asked one night as we sat on the porch stargazing. I smiled, stroking her hair. "You can be anything you want, Isla. But whatever you choose, I just want you to be happy." Rachel and Colin were names I tried not to think about, but they lingered like shadows in my mind. Rachel called a few times, leaving long voicemails, apologizing and begging for forgiveness. "Graham, I was wrong. I didn't know what I was doing. Please talk to me," she said in one, her voice breaking. I didn't respond, not because I hated her, but because I had no strength left to go back. Every time I heard her voice, I saw Isla standing in the doorway, her eyes filled with fear as she spoke of her mother. I couldn't forgive that. Colin never reached out, and I didn't want him to. My mother told me he'd moved to New York, continuing his art career, and Rachel had gone with him. I didn't know if they were together, and I didn't want to know. I'd left my wedding ring with Colin not because I wanted him to have it, but to sever all ties to the past. My father called once, months after I settled in Colorado Springs. "You handled it well, Graham," he said, his voice cold. "Keeping quiet was the right move. I hung up without replying. I didn't need his approval. I did it all for Isla, not the Whitaker name. As time passed, I found peace in my new life. I no longer dreamed of flights or felt pain hearing the distant roar of engines. Instead, I found joy in simple things. Isla's laughter, our afternoon bike rides, the letters from cadets. I started a journal not to dwell on the past, but to capture moments with Isla. Today, Isla burned the cookies, but she laughed so hard the house shook. I wrote one night. Those words reminded me I was living, rebuilding. One morning, Isla ran into the kitchen holding a drawing, a plane soaring over mountains with two tiny figures holding hands below. "That's you and me, Daddy," she said, beaming. I looked at the drawing, my heart skipping a beat. I hugged her, keeping my voice steady. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, tears welling up. In that moment, I knew I'd found new meaning, not in the sky, but right here, with Isla. I don't know what the future holds. Some nights I still lie awake thinking of what I've lost. But then I hear Isla's steady breathing, and I know I don't need to fly anymore. I've landed, not because I crashed, but because I chose to stay. For Isla, for myself. The little house in Colorado Springs isn't an end. It's a beginning, where I'm learning to live again, to be a father, a teacher, and a man no longer bound by the past. Time in Colorado Springs passed like gentle breezes through the Rocky Mountains, carrying a quiet peace I never thought I'd find again. Isla grew every day, from a shy 8-year-old into a confident 10-year-old, with a radiant smile and endless questions about the world. She still loved folding paper airplanes, listening to my stories about my grandfather and running around the USAFA campus where I taught young cadets to conquer the skies. But above all, Isla was the reason I woke up each morning, the flame that warmed my heart on the coldest days. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. Our little house was filled with traces of us. Isla's drawings taped to the walls, blooming daisies in the yard, and a small bookshelf packed with adventure books we read together each night. I was no longer a fighter pilot, no longer Senator Whitaker's son, no longer Rachel's husband. I was just Graham, Isla's dad, and that was the only title I needed. One Saturday morning, Isla's school held a family day and she insisted I come. "Daddy, you have to go," she said, tugging my hand, her bright green eyes sparkling. I laughed, letting her drag me out of the house, though I wasn't fond of crowded events. After everything that happened, I preferred the quiet of our home, but for Isla, I'd do anything. Isla's school was in central Colorado Springs, a low building with a colorful playground and welcome banners strung everywhere. Families gathered on the lawn, kids ran around, and the smell of baked goods filled the air. Isla pulled me from place to place, introducing me to her friends and teachers, her voice chirping like a little bird. "This is my dad," she said, holding her head high, and my heart warmed at the pride in her voice. At one booth, a young teacher, Ms. Miller, ran an activity where students shared about their families. Isla volunteered, holding a small piece of paper she'd written on. I sat in the back row, a bit nervous, unsure what she'd say. Ms. Miller smiled and asked, "Isla, can you tell us about your dad? What does he do?" Isla stood tall, her brown hair tied high, swaying in the breeze, her voice clear and confident. "My dad teaches people how to fly, but really he used to fly really far. Then he came back not because he crashed, but because he wanted to live with me." She turned to me, her smile as bright as the sun, and for a moment the entire schoolyard seemed to fall silent. I sat there, feeling time stand still. Isla's words, simple yet heartfelt, pierced my heart like an arrow. My eyes stung, not from sadness, but because I realized she understood me, why I was here, the sacrifices I'd chosen. I stepped outside, hiding my tears, but Ryan, a former cadet now assisting at USAFA, clapped my shoulder. "Major, that girl's something special," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I nodded, unable to speak, watching Isla run toward me and hug me tightly. "Was I good, Daddy?" she asked, beaming. I knelt down, hugged her, and whispered, "The best in the world, sweetheart." That night, with Isla asleep in her room, I sat on the porch staring at the star-filled sky. The night air was cold, but I didn't mind. I thought about my journey, from the boy under my father's shadow to the fighter pilot soaring through clouds to the man betrayed by those I loved most. I thought of Rachel, Colin, my father, and for the first time I felt no pain. They were part of my past, but they no longer defined me. Not anymore. I opened my journal and wrote a single line. Isla said I came back to live with her. And she's right. I closed the notebook, looked up at the stars. I once thought the sky was where I belonged, where I was freest. But now I realize true freedom wasn't flying through clouds, it was here, with Isla, in this little house, living a simple but full life. A few weeks later, I received a letter from my mother in Georgetown. She wrote that she was proud of me, that she saw my strength in how I cared for Isla. "You've done what your father never could," she wrote. "You put family above reputation." The letter didn't mention my father, Colin, or Rachel, and I knew she'd avoided them to spare my wounds. I folded the letter, tucked it into a drawer, and felt a small relief. My mother understood me, and that was enough to keep going. I had no contact with Rachel or Colin. I heard they were in New York, that Colin had a successful art exhibition, and Rachel worked at a psychology center. I didn't know if they were still together, and I didn't care. I'd left my wedding ring with Colin, severing every tie to the past. My father never called again, and I didn't expect him to. He lived in his world of reputation and power, but that was no longer my world. One day, during a class at USAFA, a cadet asked, "Sir, do you ever regret not flying anymore?" The question made me pause, my gaze drifting to the window where a training plane took off, leaving a white trail in the sky. I smiled, shook my head. "No," I said. "Flying was part of me, but not all of me. I found something more important." The cadet nodded as if he understood, and I continued the lesson. But inside, I knew I'd spoken the truth. I had no regrets. I'd flown through skies, landed in wars, faced storms no one saw. But the hardest landing of my life wasn't on a runway or in a battlefield. It was coming home, to Isla, to myself. One evening, Isla ran onto the porch holding a paper airplane she'd just folded. "Daddy, look!" she shouted, launching it into the air. It soared a few loops before landing on the grass, and she laughed, running to pick it up. I stood there watching her and realized I'd found the true meaning of my life, not in medals, not in flights, but in Isla's smile, in the way she held my hand, in the way she made me feel like a father. I sat beside her, helping her fold a new plane. "Daddy, I want this one to fly as high as you did," she said. I laughed, kissing her forehead. "It will, sweetheart. But no matter where it flies, I'll always be here waiting for you to land." As I write these words, I think of everything I've been through. I was once a pilot, a senator's son, a husband, a brother. But now I'm just Graham, Isla's dad, the man who found peace in silence. Silence isn't weakness, I've learned. It's strength, the way I hold on to what matters most, Isla. I look at the night sky, where stars twinkle like guiding lights. I once flew among them, thinking that was where I belonged. But now, I know my home is here, with Isla, in our little house in Colorado Springs, where I've landed and where I'll stay forever.